Nari stood before the massive viewing screen in the central command building. Her pale blue skin looked almost white under the harsh red light coming from outside. The twin suns of Cathera Prime were dying, and they were taking her entire world with them. The first sun had started changing 3 months ago. What used to be a bright yellow star was now swelling into an angry red giant. The second sun was following the same path. Both stars were supposed to burn steadily for millions more years, but something had gone terribly wrong. "The temperature readings are getting worse," said Miro, walking up behind her. His voice sounded tired and defeated. As the evacuation coordinator, he had been working day and night to find a solution. "The surface temperature has risen by 50 degrees in just 1 week." Nari nodded without turning around. She had spent her entire life studying the stars. The Villani people were brilliant scientists and engineers. They had built cities that floated in the sky and machines that could bend light itself. But now, facing the death of their sons, all their knowledge seemed useless. "What do the computers say?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "The same thing they said yesterday," Miro replied. "Zero chance of survival. The stellar collapse cannot be stopped with our current technology. Even if we could evacuate everyone, we have nowhere to go. Our ships are not built for long space travel. The Villani had always been a peaceful people. They preferred to stay on their beautiful planet, studying the universe from a distance. They had never needed to build warships or explore distant worlds. Now that choice was killing them." Sora, a young engineer, ran into the command center. Her breathing was heavy, and her large eyes showed both fear and excitement. "Nari, the deep space sensors are picking up something strange." "Strange how?" Nari asked, finally turning away from the terrible view outside. "There's a ship coming toward our system," Sora said. "But that's impossible. No one comes here anymore. The trade routes avoid us because of the stellar instability." Nari felt a small spark of hope, quickly followed by confusion. "Are you sure it's a ship? Could it be space debris?" "I checked 3 times, Sora replied. "It's definitely artificial. Metal hull, energy readings, the works. But here's the weird part. It's not trying to avoid our system. It's heading straight for us." Miro shook his head. "That makes no sense. Any intelligent being would stay far away from a dying star system. Maybe their navigation is broken." The 3 Villani hurried to the communications center. The room was filled with screens and complex equipment that could reach across the galaxy. Most of it was now useless. Who would want to talk to a doomed world? "Try to contact them," Nari ordered. Sora's fingers moved quickly over the controls. She sent out greeting signals in dozens of different languages and formats. For several minutes there was no response. Then suddenly a voice came through the speakers. "This is cargo freighter Busan Express," the voice said. "I'm receiving your signals, but your language is new to me." Switching to Universal Translator. The voice had an unusual accent, unlike anything the Villani had heard before. After a moment of static, it came through clearly. "Hello, Cathara Prime, this is Captain Tejo of the human vessel Busan Express. I picked up your distress signal and changed course to help. What's your situation?" The 3 Villani looked at each other in shock. "Human?" Sora whispered. "I've heard of them, but they're supposed to be far away from this sector." Nari activated the communication system. "Captain Tejo, this is Chief Science Coordinator Nari. I must warn you, our system is extremely dangerous. Both of our suns are collapsing. You should turn around immediately and leave this area." There was a pause. Then Tejo's voice came back, sounding calm and curious rather than frightened. "How long before the collapse becomes critical?" "Our calculations show we have perhaps 20 days before the planet becomes uninhabitable," Nari replied. 40 days before complete destruction. There is nothing you can do to help us. Please save yourself." "Well, I'm already here," Tejo said with what sounded like a laugh. "My hyperdrive is damaged anyway, so I'm not going anywhere fast. Mind if I take a look at your situation? Maybe there's something I can do." Miro grabbed Nari's arm. "This human doesn't understand," he said quietly. "Our best scientists have worked on this problem for months. Our quantum computers have run millions of simulations. There is no solution." But Nari found herself curious about this strange being who flew toward danger instead of away from it. "Captain Tejo, are you aware that this is a hopeless situation? Our entire civilization is about to be destroyed." "I've seen a lot of hopeless situations," Tejo replied. "Some of them turned out to be not so hopeless after all. Can you send me your data? I'd like to see what you're dealing with." Against her better judgment, Nari began transmitting their research. She sent star charts, temperature readings, gravitational measurements, and computer models. everything they had learned about their dying suns. While the data uploaded, she watched the approaching ship on their sensors. It was much smaller than Villani vessels, with a rough, practical design. Nothing like their elegant, artistic ships. This human ship looked like it was built for hard work rather than beauty. "Your planet is beautiful," Teho's voice said suddenly. "I can see it from here. Those floating cities are incredible. It would be a real shame to lose all of this." Sora started crying quietly. It was the first time anyone had called their world beautiful in months. Everyone had been so focused on the approaching disaster that they had forgotten why their planet was worth saving. "All right, I've got your data," Teho said. "This is definitely a tough one, but I've got some ideas. Mind if I come down and talk to you in person? It's easier to work on problems face to face." "Captain, the surface radiation is already dangerous," Nari warned, "and it's getting worse every day." "I've dealt with radiation before," he replied cheerfully. "Besides, somebody once told me that the best way to solve a problem is to get as close to it as possible." As Nari watched the human ship descend through their atmosphere, she felt something she had not experienced in months: curiosity about the future. This Teho was clearly either very brave or very foolish, perhaps both. But for the first time since their sons started dying, someone had looked at their impossible situation and said, maybe. Teho's ship landed in the main spaceport of the capital city. Nari, Miro, and Sora waited nervously as the small cargo freighter powered down. They had never met a human before, and they weren't sure what to expect. The ship's door opened with a loud hiss of steam. A figure stepped out wearing a simple work suit and carrying a toolkit. He was taller than the Villani, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. This was their first look at a human. "Wow," Teho said, looking up at the floating buildings above them. "Your architecture is amazing. How do you keep those structures in the air?" "Gravity manipulation technology," Sora answered automatically, then caught herself. "But Captain, we should focus on the emergency. The stellar radiation is increasing every hour." Teho nodded and pulled out a small device that beeped softly. "Yeah, I can measure it. Pretty intense. But not immediately deadly yet. We've got some time to work." Nari felt frustrated. This human seemed to be treating their desperate situation like an interesting puzzle. "Captain Teho, perhaps you don't understand the scale of what's happening. Our suns are dying. In a few weeks, this entire planet will be burned to nothing." "I understand," Teho said, his expression becoming more serious. "I've read your data. Your scientists are brilliant. The measurements and calculations are incredibly detailed. But I noticed something interesting." He gestured toward the red sky above them. "Your people focused on trying to fix the stars themselves. All your research is about stopping the stellar collapse or slowing it down." "That makes sense. It's the obvious approach." "Of course," Miro said. "If we could stabilize the fusion process in the star cores, we could return them to normal burning. But it requires technology we don't have." "Right," Teho agreed. "You'd need to get inside stars that are in the process of exploding. Even if you had the technology, the energy requirements would be enormous. Probably impossible." The three Villani looked at each other with confusion. If this human agreed that their approach was impossible, what was he thinking? Teho sat down on a nearby bench and opened his toolkit. "But what if we don't try to fix the stars?" "I don't understand," Nari said. "Well, your people are in danger because your planet is too close to dying stars," Teho explained as he assembled some kind of scanning device. "The obvious solution is to fix the stars. But there's another option: move the planet." Sora laughed, but not with humor. "Move a planet? Captain, that's completely impossible. The gravitational forces alone would tear Cathera Prime apart." "Maybe," Teho said. "Or maybe not. Depends on how you do it." Wu, Teho's ship computer, spoke through a small communicator on his belt. "Captain, I've completed the initial scan of the system. The asteroid belt contains approximately 47 billion tons of useful material." "Asteroids?" Miro asked. "What do asteroids have to do with anything?" Teho stood up and began walking toward the center of the city. The Villani followed him, curious despite their skepticism. "Everything's connected," he said. "You've got dying stars, a planet that needs to move, and a bunch of rocks floating in space. Put them together right, and maybe you solve all your problems at once." They entered the main research building where dozens of Villani scientists were still working desperately on their calculations. Many of them stopped to stare at the strange visitor. "Can I see your gravitational models?" Teho asked. Nari led him to a wall-sized display showing the complex forces at work in their solar system. The dying stars were shown in red, with deadly radiation spreading outward. Cathara Prime sat directly in the path of destruction. Taiho studied the display for several minutes, occasionally asking questions about specific details. The Volani scientists gathered around, fascinated by his unusual questions. "Why are you asking about the asteroid belt's orbital velocity?" one scientist asked. "And what does the planet's rotational period have to do with stellar collapse?" asked another. "Everything," Taiho replied. "You're thinking about this as separate problems. Dying stars over here, planet in danger over there, asteroids floating around somewhere else. But it's all one system. Everything affects everything else," he pointed to the display. "Your asteroids are moving at roughly 30 kilometers per second. If you could redirect enough of them to hit your planet at exactly the right angles, you could change Cathara Prime's orbit." The room fell silent. Then Dr. Hyun, the eldest scientist, spoke up. "The energy required to move sufficient asteroids would be enormous. And even if we could do it, the impacts would cause massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. We'd destroy our world trying to save it." "Not if you do it gradually," Taiho said. "Lots of small pushes instead of one big shove. Spread the impacts out over the planet's surface. Use the gravity of the dying stars to help slingshot you away." "But the timing would have to be perfect," Sora protested. "One mistake and we'd send the planet spinning into space or straight into the sun." "Yep," Taiho agreed cheerfully. "It would be incredibly dangerous and require split-second timing. Most people would call it completely insane." "Then why are you suggesting it?" Nari asked. Taiho looked around the room at all the worried faces. "Because sometimes the only way out of an impossible situation is to try something impossible." Wu's voice came through the communicator again. "Captain, I've run preliminary calculations based on your parameters. The plan has a 37% chance of success." 37%? Miro said. "Those are terrible odds." "Better than 0%, Taiho replied. "Which is what you have now." Dr. Hyun stepped forward. "Even if this plan could work in theory, we don't have ships capable of moving asteroids. Our vessels are designed for research and peaceful purposes." "I know," Taiho said. "That's why I'm here. My ship is a cargo hauler. It's got mining equipment, heavy-duty engines, and industrial-grade tractor beams. It's not pretty, but it's built for moving big chunks of rock around." "One ship can't move enough asteroids to change a planet's orbit," Nari pointed out. "One ship can't," Taiho agreed. "But one ship can start the process. Get the first few asteroids moving in the right direction, and their gravity will start affecting other asteroids. Create a cascade effect. It's like starting an avalanche with a single snowball." The Volani scientists began talking among themselves in excited whispers. For the first time in months, they were discussing something other than their certain doom. "This is madness," Dr. Hyun said. "We would be betting our entire civilization on an untested theory." "Your entire civilization is going to die anyway if you don't try something," Taiho replied gently. "At least this way you have a chance." Nari found herself staring at this strange human who had appeared from nowhere with an impossible plan. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you risk your life for people you've never met?" Taiho shrugged. "Because you asked for help. As if that was the most natural thing in the universe." The next morning, half the scientific community of Cathara Prime gathered in the main research center. Word had spread quickly about the humans' impossible plan. Some called it brilliant, others called it suicide. Dr. Hyun stood before a massive holographic display showing the asteroid belt. His calculations had been running all night and his expression was troubled. "I've analyzed Captain Taiho's proposal in detail," he announced. "Mathematically, it could work, but the margin for error is incredibly small." Taiho sat in the back of the room, quietly eating something from a food packet. He seemed remarkably calm for someone suggesting they move an entire planet. Nari noticed that he listened carefully to every objection, but didn't get defensive or angry. "The gravitational calculations alone are staggering," Dr. Hyun continued. "We would need to redirect exactly 43 large asteroids, each weighing over 1 billion tons. They must impact the planet at precise locations, with exact timing intervals of no more than 6 hours apart." Leah, one of the younger pilots, raised her hand. "What if we miss one of the impact points?" "If we're off by more than 50 kilometers, the planet's rotation could become unstable," Dr. Hyun replied. "If we're off by more than 200 kilometers, we could crack the planet's core." Worried murmurs filled the room. The plan sounded more impossible with each new detail. But if we do nothing, we die for certain, Sora said quietly. At least this gives us a chance. Jin, an elderly Villani who rarely spoke at meetings, stood up slowly. His voice was soft but carried clearly across the room. Many years ago, when I was young, my grandmother told me stories about the ancient days. She said there was a time when our people attempted great and dangerous things. We built the first floating cities by throwing stones into the sky until one of them stayed up. The room fell silent. Jin rarely shared the old stories. My grandmother said we had forgotten how to try impossible things, Jin continued. We became so smart that we only attempted what we knew would work. Perhaps it is time to remember that sometimes the impossible is simply something no one has tried yet. Taiho stood up and walked to the front of the room. If we're going to do this, we need to start immediately. The stellar collapse is accelerating faster than your original predictions. How much time do we have? Nari asked. Wu ran new calculations based on this morning's radiation readings. Taiho replied. 18 days before the planet becomes uninhabitable. Maybe 22 if we're lucky. Dr. Hyun looked pale. That's 3 days less than our previous estimate. Which means we can't waste time arguing about whether this is possible, Taiho said. We need to start moving asteroids today. Leah stepped forward. I'll help. My ship isn't as powerful as yours, but it has precision navigation systems. I can guide the smaller asteroids into position. It's too dangerous, Miro protested. The asteroid belt is already being affected by the stellar radiation. One solar flare could fry your ship's electronics. Then we'd better work fast. Leah replied with a grin that reminded Taiho of his human friends. Dr. Hyun activated the holographic display showing the asteroid belt in detail. If we're actually going to attempt this madness, we need a precise plan. Captain Taiho, show us exactly which asteroids you want to move. Taiho studied the display for several minutes, occasionally asking Wu to run calculations on specific rocks. We start with this cluster here, he said, pointing to a group of large asteroids. They're already moving in roughly the right direction. We just need to speed them up and adjust their course slightly. How do we move something that weighs 1 billion tons? Sora asked. Very carefully, Taiho replied, and with a lot of patience. We use my ship's mining equipment to attach rocket engines to each asteroid. Small, steady thrust over several days. It's like steering a mountain, but it can be done. Leah nodded thoughtfully. My ship could carry the rocket engines to the asteroids while you handle the heavy installation work. What about the impact sites? Dr. Hyun asked. Where exactly do we need these asteroids to hit the planet? Taiho gestured to another part of the display. That's the tricky part. We need to hit the planet in a spiral pattern, transferring rotational energy gradually. Each impact has to happen at exactly the right moment, or we'll tear the world apart instead of moving it. Ara, the communications coordinator, spoke up. We'll need to evacuate the impact zones. Even with precise targeting, the shockwaves will be enormous. How many people will we need to relocate? Nari asked. About 40 million, Ara replied after checking her data. Most of our major cities are in the projected impact areas. The room erupted in worried conversations. Moving 40 million people in less than 3 weeks seemed as impossible as moving the planet itself. We can do it, Miro said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at the evacuation coordinator who had been so pessimistic before. I've been working on emergency relocation plans for months. We have the transportation and temporary housing. It will be difficult, but not impossible. Kai, a young Villani who had been quiet throughout the meeting, finally spoke. Captain Taiho, why are you helping us? Your people are not from this sector. You owe us nothing. Taiho looked surprised by the question. Does it matter why? Yes, Kai insisted. If we're going to trust you with our entire world, we need to understand your motivations. Taiho was quiet for a long moment. Where I come from, we have a saying, nobody gets left behind. It means that when someone needs help, you help them. It doesn't matter if they're family, friends, or complete strangers. You help because that's what people do for each other. Even when it's dangerous? Kai asked. Especially when it's dangerous, Taiho replied. Easy help isn't really help at all. Yoon, the senior government representative, had been listening to everything without speaking. Now she stood and addressed the room. This plan is insane, dangerous, and has a high probability of failure. But it's also our only hope. I'm authorizing the operation. She turned to Taiho. Captain, our people will follow your lead. But I need you to understand, if this plan fails, our entire civilization dies with it. I understand, Taiho said seriously. That's why we're going to make sure it doesn't fail. Dr. Hyun began pulling up detailed star charts. If we're really doing this, we need to finalize the calculations immediately. Every hour of delay reduces our chances of success. Then let's get to work, Taiho said, rolling up his sleeves. We've got a planet to move. As the Villani scientists began the complex task of planning their world's salvation, Nari found herself watching the human who had made it all possible. Taiho worked with calm confidence, as if moving planets was something he did every day. For the first time since their sons began dying, Nari allowed herself to hope that her people might survive. This strange human had looked at their impossible situation and simply refused to accept that nothing could be done. Perhaps that was what made humans special, not their technology or their intelligence, but their stubborn refusal to give up on impossible things. 12 days had passed since they began the impossible task of moving a planet. Taiho's hands were covered in cuts and burns from working in the radiation-soaked asteroid belt. His ship's hull was scarred and blackened, but the Busan Express kept running. Asteroid 39 is in position. Leah's voice crackled through the communication system. Her small ship looked tiny next to the massive rock she was guiding, rocket engines attached and ready to fire. Ara coordinated the operation from the planet's surface, tracking dozens of conversations at once. Confirmed, Asteroid 39. You're cleared to begin acceleration burn. Impact window opens in 14 hours. Taiho wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at the tactical display. 38 asteroids had already been redirected successfully. Each one had hit the planet exactly where and when it was supposed to, gradually pushing Cathara Prime away from the dying suns, but something was wrong. Ooh, show me the stellar readings again, he said to his ship's computer. Captain, the stellar collapse is accelerating beyond all previous models, Wu replied. Both suns are now entering final phase collapse. The radiation output has increased by 40% in the last 6 hours. Taiho felt his stomach drop. They had planned for 18 days, but the stars were dying faster than anyone had predicted. How much time do we actually have? At current acceleration rates, the stellar explosion will begin in 36 hours, Wu calculated. Cathara Prime must be at least 50 million kilometers away to survive the shockwave. And how far away are we now? 42 million kilometers. Taiho closed his eyes and did the math. They needed to move the planet 8 million more kilometers in 36 hours. It should have been impossible, but they had already done so many impossible things. Ara, patch me through to the planetary command center, he said. Nari's voice came through clearly despite the growing radiation interference. Taiho, we're seeing the same readings here. The evacuation teams are moving as fast as they can, but we're running out of time. We need to change the plan, Taiho said. Instead of 43 asteroids, we're going to use every rock we can find. Small ones, big ones, doesn't matter. We need maximum acceleration right now. Dr. Hyun's voice joined the conversation. Captain, using random asteroids could destabilize the planet's rotation. We could tear ourselves apart. We'll tear ourselves apart anyway if we don't get far enough from the explosion, Taiho replied. Sometimes you have to risk everything to save anything. Leah's ship appeared on his scanner, moving toward another asteroid. I'm ready for the next target. My navigation systems are holding up despite the radiation. Negative, Leah, Taiho said. This next part is too dangerous. I'm handling the final asteroids myself. Absolutely not, she replied firmly. You've been working for 12 days straight in lethal radiation. Your reflexes are slowing down, and your ship is barely holding together. You need help. Taiho wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. His hands were shaking from exhaustion and radiation exposure. Okay, but we stay together. No more splitting up. The two ships moved toward the largest remaining asteroid, a mountain-sized chunk of rock and metal that could provide the final push they needed. But as they approached it, Taiho's sensors detected something alarming. Leah, get back, he warned. This asteroid is unstable. The stellar radiation has heated it unevenly. It could break apart at any moment. Then we'd better work fast, she replied, maneuvering her ship closer to the asteroid's surface. On Cathara Prime, Kai watched the sky with growing fear. The twin suns had grown enormous, filling half the horizon with angry red light. Even through the protective dome over his city, he could feel the heat on his skin. The surface temperature has risen 20 degrees just today, Yoon reported to the emergency council. The southern continent is already uninhabitable. We're evacuating the last cities now. Miro coordinated the massive relocation effort. Millions of Villani were moving to underground shelters on the far side of the planet. Transport ships are at maximum capacity. We're using every vehicle we have, including personal craft. What about the floating cities? Era asked. We're bringing them down to ground level and sealing them, Miro replied. They'll provide additional shelter during the final acceleration phase. In space, Taeho and Leah worked desperately to attach engines to the unstable asteroid. The rock was already showing stress fractures from the heat and radiation. Pieces kept breaking off and floating away. Engine Pod 7 is secured, Leah reported. But this asteroid won't hold together much longer. Just a few more minutes, Taeho said, installing the final engine pod. We need maximum thrust to get the acceleration we need. Wu's voice interrupted them. Captain, I'm detecting massive energy fluctuations from both stars. The final collapse has begun. Taeho looked toward the dying suns and saw them pulsing with dangerous light. How long do we have? 12 hours until the shockwave reaches Cathera Prime's current position. That's not enough time, Leah said. Even with this asteroid, we can't get far enough away. Taeho stared at his ship's reactor display. The Busan Express had been running at maximum power for days. The reactor was overheating, and the engines were operating far beyond safe limits. But there was one more thing he could do. Leah, get back to the planet, he ordered. What are you planning? I'm going to use my ship's reactor as an additional gravitational anchor, Taeho explained. If I position the Busan Express correctly and overload the reactor, it will create a gravity well that helps slingshot the planet away from the explosion. That will destroy your ship, Leah protested. And probably kill you. Maybe, Taeho said calmly, but it will save 40 billion Villani lives. There has to be another way. There isn't, Taeho replied. This is what humans do, Leah. We don't abandon people when things get tough. On the planet, Nari listened to the conversation with tears in her eyes. This human who had appeared from nowhere was preparing to sacrifice his life for her people. Taeho, isn't there any way you can escape after triggering the reactor overload? The timing has to be perfect, he explained. Someone needs to stay with the ship to make sure it happens at exactly the right moment. 1 second too early or too late, and the gravitational effect won't work properly. Jin, the elderly Villani who had shared the ancient stories, spoke quietly into his communicator. Captain Taeho, my grandmother would have said you have the heart of the old heroes, the ones who did impossible things because they were right, not because they were safe. I'm just doing what needs to be done, Taeho replied. Ara's voice came through with quiet desperation. All evacuation teams report ready. The planet is as prepared as we can make it. Population is secure in emergency shelters. Then let's finish this, Taeho said. Leah, clear the area. Everyone else, hold on tight. This is going to be rough. As Leah's ship retreated to safety, Taeho positioned the Busan Express at the calculated point between the asteroid and the planet. His ship looked small and fragile against the vast forces they were trying to control. Wu, begin reactor overload sequence, he commanded. Captain, this will result in complete destruction of the ship. Are you certain? Taeho looked one last time at the beautiful blue planet they were trying to save. Somewhere down there, 40 billion people were counting on him to get them to safety. I'm certain, he said. Initiate overload. The ship began to shake as the reactor pushed beyond all safety limits. Through the view screen, Taeho could see the dying suns beginning their final terrible explosion. It was going to be close. The Busan Express shook violently as its reactor pushed beyond every safety limit. Taeho gripped his command chair and watched the readings climb into dangerous territory. Around him, sparks flew from overloaded systems, and the air filled with the smell of burning electronics. Reactor at 150% capacity, Wu announced with mechanical calm. Gravity well formation beginning. Through the view screen, Taeho could see space itself bending around his ship. The reactor's overload was creating exactly the gravitational effect they needed. A slingshot that would fling Cathera Prime away from the dying suns. Leah, what's your position? He called through the crackling communications. Safe distance achieved, her voice replied. Taeho, the planet is starting to move faster. Your gravity well is working. On Cathera Prime's surface, the ground shook with massive earthquakes as the world accelerated away from its doom. In the underground shelters, millions of Villani held each other and prayed to whatever gods might listen. Nari watched her instruments with growing hope and terror. Planetary velocity increasing. We're at, I can't believe this. We're at escape velocity from the stellar explosion zone. Current distance from stellar shockwave impact point. Hyun asked from the emergency command center. 51 million kilometers and climbing, Ara reported. We're going to make it. But in space, Taeho's ship was dying. The reactor overload had served its purpose, but now the Busan Express was tearing itself apart. Warning alarms screamed through the bridge and entire sections of the ship were losing power. Wu, can you maintain the gravity well for another 60 seconds? Taeho asked. Negative, Captain. Reactor containment is failing. Complete meltdown in 37 seconds. Taeho looked at the tactical display one more time. The planet was moving fast enough now. The momentum would carry Cathera Prime to safety, even after his ship was destroyed. They had done it. Against all odds, they had actually done it. All stations, this is Captain Taeho, he broadcast on all frequencies. Planet evacuation successful. Cathera Prime is clear of the blast zone. You're all going to be okay. Taeho, Leah's voice came through with desperate urgency. I'm coming back for you. Abandon ship and I'll pick you up. No time, he replied calmly. Stay clear. The reactor explosion will be massive. On the planet, 40 billion Villani listened to their radios as the human who had saved them prepared to die. Many were crying. Some were praying. All of them would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. Captain, Jin's elderly voice came through clearly. You have given us life. How can we repay such a gift? Don't let it be wasted, Taeho replied. Build something beautiful. Help other people when they need it. That's payment enough. The reactor's containment field collapsed. For a brief moment, the Busan Express became a miniature star, blazing with the light of nuclear fusion. The explosion was visible from the planet's surface, a bright point of light against the darkness of space. Then, silence. The shock wave from the dying suns finally reached Cathera Prime's former position, but the planet was no longer there. The world sailed safely through space, carried by the momentum that Taeho's sacrifice had given it. 2 days later, Leah's sensors detected something impossible. I'm reading a life pod, she reported with excitement. Emergency beacon, single occupant. It's him! Taeho's alive. The rescue was almost more dangerous than the original plan. Taeho's escape pod was heavily damaged and drifting near the edge of the blast zone, but Leah managed to retrieve it, bringing the unconscious human back to Cathera Prime. He woke up 3 days later in a Villani medical facility. Nari was sitting beside his bed reading reports on her datapad. How long was I out? He asked groggily. 72 hours, she replied with a smile. You have severe radiation poisoning, 3 broken ribs and burns over 40% of your body. But you're alive. And the planet? Safe, Nari said. We're currently orbiting a stable yellow star about 60 light-years from our original position. The new sun is almost identical to our old ones before they started dying. It's perfect. Taeho tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. What about your people? How are they handling the relocation? Better than expected, Nari replied. The new star system has 3 habitable worlds. We're calling this one New Cathera. The others will become colonies. For the first time in our history, we'll be a multi-planet civilization. Rio, the Villani historian, entered the room carrying a large ceremonial box. Captain Taeho, I have something for you from our people. Inside the box was a crystal star, beautifully carved and glowing with internal light. This is the highest honor our civilization can bestow, Rio explained. It's called the Star of Courage. Only 7 have been given in our entire history. I don't need any rewards, Taeho said, looking embarrassed. I just did what anyone would do. No, Nari said firmly. What you did was extraordinary. You saved our entire species when we had given up hope. You risked your life for strangers without asking for anything in return. Through the window, they could see Villani workers already building new floating cities under the light of their new sun. Children played in the streets, laughing and running as if the world had not nearly ended just a week ago. We've made some changes to our society, Nari continued. We're calling it the Taeho Protocol. From now on, when anyone asks for help, we respond. It doesn't matter how dangerous or impossible it seems. We help because that's what people do for each other. You're going to help other species? Taeho asked. We're going to try, Nari replied. You showed us that sometimes the most impossible solutions come from simply refusing to accept that nothing can be done. A few days later, Minho arrived in a human rescue ship to take Taeho home. As they prepared to leave New Cathera, Thousands of Villani gathered at the spaceport to say goodbye. Ina, a young Villani child born during the planet's journey, ran up to Taiho and handed him a drawing she had made. It showed a small ship pulling a planet away from angry red suns. "Thank you for saving my world," she said simply. Taiho knelt down to her level. "Take care of it, okay? Make sure it stays beautiful." As the human ship lifted off, Taiho looked down at the world they had saved. The floating cities sparkled in the light of the new sun, and the continents showed the green of growing things. It was exactly as beautiful as he had remembered. "So what's the plan now?" Minho asked as they entered hyperspace. "I don't know," Taiho replied. "Maybe we'll find someone else who needs help." Behind them, New Kethera continued its orbit around a stable star. The Villani built monuments to remember their salvation, but more importantly, they built ships to carry help to others who might need it. The galaxy had learned something new about humans that day. When faced with impossible odds and certain destruction, most species would accept their fate. But humans had a different approach. They would look at the impossible situation, roll up their sleeves and get to work, because that's what people do for each other. Years later, when Villani storytellers told the tale of their world's salvation, they always ended with the same words. "The human asked for nothing except that we remember to help others. And so we do, because that is what people do for each other." The legend of the human who moved a planet became the foundation of a new way of thinking. Across the galaxy, species that had given up on impossible problems began to try again. They learned that sometimes the most hopeless situations just needed someone willing to refuse defeat. They learned to think like humans, and the universe became a little bit brighter because of it.